Hello everyone, I hope you're okay. Today for topic we are going to be looking at evacuation. So just to start us off, I've got some words that we might come across this week when we're thinking about evacuation in World War II. So a billet, a person who houses an evacuee. So householders from around the country who housed children and who were given money by the government. We also had a billeting officer, that is a person responsible for helping to find homes for evacuees. Evacuation means leaving a place. Evacuee is a person who leaves a place, and a host family is a family who takes care of an evacuee. So first things first, we need to find out what is an evacuee. Some of you might already have some prior knowledge about what evacuation and evacuees are, depending on what you did your World War II project on, for example. Maybe if you've read books or watched films, you might have a deeper understanding of it. So let's just go through this together so that we all understand what an evacuee is first of all. So, as we know, World War II started in 1939. The children that lived in the cities were in constant danger of bombs. We know that when Hitler started his Blitzkrieg campaign against Britain, he was dropping a lot of bombs on the cities, and that's why they had to do their blackout to keep them safe. So the government decided to keep children extra safe. We need to take them to the countryside. So the children were moved to the countryside away from the bombs, and these children were called evacuees. So the children, they went to school, and from school they were taken to the train stations, and they were all given a label to wear. The label would have their name on it, might have their age on it, and where they're from, and they would have to wear that so that they could be easily identified, like a name badge. Sometimes their teachers would go with them to their new place, so they would all get on the train together and they would journey to the countryside with their teacher, and in some cases their teacher would still teach them when they went to school. So they moved away from their mum and dad's, but at least they had their teacher, maybe their school friends as well, to keep them company. So they got onto a train and they went into the countryside. Their families did not know where they were going, so it was all completely random. It was just to get them to a nice safe place. They didn't know where they were going, the children didn't know, the families didn't know. They would have to wait until the children got to that place, and the children could write them a letter, their families a letter, just to say where they were and that they'd arrived safely, that sort of thing. The children were allowed to take a small suitcase which had their pyjamas in it, some clean clothes, maybe a teddy or a small toy, soap and a toothbrush. So they couldn't take a lot of things with them, so they had to decide and pack really, really carefully, make sure they had everything that they needed. They might have taken things like a notebook and pen, those sorts of things to their new place that they were going to be living in. The children also had to have their gas mask at all times, and this would help them breathe during gas attacks. We know that in World War I, gas was used a lot in the trenches, and so the government had prepared for this. They were worried that Hitler was going to drop gas bombs as well as explosive bombs, so everybody had their gas mask on them at all times, and it would be carried around on a wee bag over your shoulder, and you had to have that on you at all times, whether you were an evacuee or not, because you just didn't know if there was going to be a bomb or a gas attack, so it was just to keep everybody safe. So some children thought this was a nice big adventure, and others were frightened and their mums, their dads wanted to go back home to their families. So there was lots of different emotions that people had. You can imagine if I said to you, right, we're going to move to the countryside, you have to leave mum and dad behind, and we're all just going to get onto a train, you would probably have lots of different emotions, like fear, worry, anxiety, but maybe a bit of excitement as well, because you're going to visit a new place. It's like a big adventure. So when they arrived in the countryside, the children would live with a new family and went to new schools. So it would be a random family, you didn't know who you were going to be living with. They could have children already, they might not have children, they could be older, they could be younger. It was completely random, and then you went to the school in that town or village that you were living in. Once they were settled in their new homes, they could write letters to their families. Most did want to go home. Obviously life in the country might be very different to life in the city. So you can see here there's an example of a letter, lots of kisses from this person wanting to go home. After the war ended in 1945, some evacuees returned home, others stayed in their new homes, and there could be lots of different reasons for that, that they decided to stay. Perhaps their own home was destroyed, or they got to return home if they were lucky enough. I think in some cases some mums did go with some of the children. For example, if the mum maybe had a young baby as well as some older children, I think they were all allowed to travel together. So some people were lucky enough to travel with their own mum, but obviously not everybody would have had a young baby brother or sister that they could travel with. I am just saying mums because most of the dads would be away at war, or working for the war effort, so it usually was mums that would go with them. Dads would be expected to go to war or do some fighting. So that's a bit about the background of evacuation. What I've now got for you is some real life stories of people who were actually evacuated during World War II. So first up we've got Dennis. So that is Dennis there. So this is Dennis's story when he was 8. So I was born on the 31st of July 1932 in New Cross, South London. I am the middle child in a family of 3, a brother 2 years younger and a sister 2 years older. During the war years I was evacuated 4 times to different parts of England and Wales. The first time I went with the whole school to Ringmer in Sussex. My sister and brother came with me. I can't remember anything about the journey on the train or even arriving at the destination. All I can recall is the 3 of us stayed in a country house surrounded by lovely countryside. This area is called South Downs. The sea on one side with soft hills leading down to the coast. I loved walking and exploring the pathways along the coast. I had never had such freedom before. We stayed there for 6 months before going home to London. Before our return the winter was very cold. Everything was frozen, the streams, rivers and ponds. 5 months later the whole family moved to Hatfield in Hertfordshire. My dad's job was connected with the aircraft industry. We stayed with a local family during this time. The husband of the house was a milkman, and as I enjoyed being in the open air, I got up early in the morning to help him with his milk round. He didn't have a van for his round, but a horse and cart. Our stay in Hatfield lasted 6 months before we once again returned to London. Home again to the Blitz. For a while we lived in a war zone. On the way to and from school, my school friends and I would find out what was damaged in the night raids. We picked up shrapnel from bombs. Some of it was still hot. I can't remember being frightened by all the bombed buildings we saw. Somehow it seemed fun in a way. However, the war was becoming dangerous in London, so a collection of junior schools and their teacher were sent to a place called Lampeter in South Wales. This time my sister stayed with 2 single ladies, while my brother and I were billeted on a farm. The farmer shared the house with his son and a local maid who did the cooking and housework. I loved the big fire in the living room kitchen because it smelled of freshly baked bread and cooking. The farm had a small dairy herd and a big bull. I guess I can look back and say that this was a very happy, contented time in my life. The freedom to roam around the countryside, climbing trees, playing without supervision in the fresh air was wonderful. However, all the farms are kept busy all year round, so being a big strong lad, the farmer taught me how to milk the cows, prepare their food, clear the shed of manure, feed the chickens, and lift bales of straw and many more chores. I spent 9 months with this family. They had 2 children and it was a lovely happy time I spent with them. Once again I was lucky enough to live in the country area that allowed me to explore the surrounding fields and play my games. Being an evacuee made me more confident, independent person. The farm work taught me the value of the cycle of the seasons, birth and death, supply and demand of food, and the effects of the weather. I have never lost this need to be out in the fresh air walking and looking at nature in all her glory. Yes, there were many bad times away from home and family, but it made me stronger in spirit to deal with my future life. The next story we have is Hazel, when Hazel was 12. My name is Hazel and I was born in 1926 in Lewisham, London. In 1939, when war was declared, I was 12 years old, and I attended a private school as a scholarship pupil. When the whole school was evacuated, we all went together, teacher, headmistress, plus all the equipment we needed for studying. The headmistress made sure that no war was going to interfere with the girls' education. As I was 12 years old, I treated the whole thing as an adventure. My first move was not too far from London, a place called Ashford in Kent. We were in a village hall waiting to be chosen by our respective hosts. When I remember being given a tin of corned beef and a tin of condensed milk for supper that night, I had never tasted corned beef before, and I thought it was a real laugh to be given this tinned food. The lady of the manor chose 2 girls, and as there was only one of us left, we pleaded with her to stay together. She said, "Oh, very well, I will ring the butler and tell him to put up another bed." The lady of the manor and her family were very rich people. They lived in a huge house with a home farm attached. We 3 girls were told to go downstairs with the butler and his wife, who was the cook. They were Austrian and spoke very little in English. One day the lady called us into the sitting room and said we could play anywhere in the gardens except in the front of the drawing room. This life of luxury only lasted 10 days. We were relocated to the centre of Ashford, which was a big town not far away from the big house. So off I went with the billeting teacher to my new home. On arrival, the lady said I wanted 2 little girls, but when she was told that there weren't any, she said, "OK, I will take a big girl instead." The couple were very nice and were childless. My first shock was the discovery of no inside toilet or bathroom. A pot under the bed was my answer to emergencies in the night. The first chore every morning was a bucket for collection. I had never seen this before because we had a bathroom, a toilet and telephone at home. I moved several times afterwards, so I got used to this scenario. A bath night in every house I stayed in was Friday night. Rigidly applied to everyone. The next story we have is from Joan, and Joan was aged 6. I was born in 1933 and my brother was born in 1935. We lived in a place called Kilburn, London. My school was called St Augustine's School, but my brother was still too young for school. In 1939 World War II was declared and bombing started in London. So in 1939 my school was evacuated from the heavily populated area of London to the extreme tip of south-west England called Penzance. This was a sleepy little town by the seaside and surrounded by farming countryside. It was very different from my home in London. My mother took my brother and myself to a big train station called Paddington in London. She did not tell us that she would not be coming with us on the train, only that I must hold my brother's hand all through the journey. The whole of my school were there, plus the teachers who took care of us. When the train left the platform and my mother still stood standing there, I felt very frightened. We carried a gas mask over one shoulder and another containing enough food for the journey over the other. A label pinned on our lapel had our name and school in London. The journey was very long, 10 hours in near darkness. On arrival in Penzance station, we were told to climb onto a lorry and taken to the village hall, which was very bright after our dark train journey. The hall was filled with local people and us children. 10 children were told to stand on stage whilst the local people chose the children they wanted. My brother and I were last up onto the stage, so at this point only one couple was left. They agreed to take my brother but not me, but I refused to let go of his hand. They reluctantly took us both. The next story is Sheila, when Sheila was aged 7. My brothers and I lived in Silverton in East London, an industrial area close to the docks. My father had died just before the war, and Mum was left to look after our newsagent, tobacco and confectionery business. She did not want to be parted from us, but a relative insisted that we children be evacuated with the rest of the school. I remember the bus journey from Silverton Viaduct to Paddington Station, and the fact that parents weren't allowed to see us off. Lots of the children were sick on the travels, possibly because too many were given sweets by the parents. Neither children nor parents were told where we were being sent to. We ended up in a hall in Albert Street, Oxford. We were all very tired, but were then dragged through streets in groups whilst the billeting officers knocked on doors. We were almost the last to be picked as no one wanted 3 children together. I felt really unwanted. Eventually, Alan, aged 5, and I, 7, were left at a small house in Nelson Street, and Ivor, 9, and another boy went to Walton Crescent, where he was housed to a family of 7. I suppose they wanted the money, plus another evacuee. They all slept top to toe, 4 in a bed. Our foster parents told us plainly that they did not want us. Mum and others visited every month, even though the authorities thought this wasn't good for parents and children. Mum sent money in parcels, which we didn't get. Mrs. L treated me like a slave, no affection at all. I felt she hated me. We had to see ourselves off to school, and we weren't allowed in the house if she was out. She sent me out in the bitter cold weather to run her errands and do bits of shopping. I always felt hungry. Mr. L was good to Alan and brought him toys from the shop where he worked. It was my first experience of country life and animals. I saw hunts, picked wild flowers, and went to a farm to see cows being milked straight into jugs we took there. So we heard 4 very different stories there from 4 children who experienced being evacuated during World War II. What I'd like you to think about just now, reflect on those stories that you've just heard. What was similar in all of the stories and what was slightly different? How would you have felt if that was you in that situation? How did the children feel in that situation? About all their different experiences. So pause here, maybe make a couple of sentences to answer those questions. Okay, last activity today, we heard at the start about the suitcases that the children were allowed to pack to take with them when they were being evacuated. So on the screen just now I have got a list of things that they would be allowed to pack in their suitcase, and then differentiated between boys and girls what each person would be allowed to take with them. What I would like you to do is have a wee think about what you would pack if you were being evacuated today. What would be in your one suitcase that you're allowed to take with you. On the screen just now is what's called a Venn diagram. I have also uploaded this into Teams if you want a clearer look at it. So a Venn diagram, you can see it's 2 overlapping circles or ovals. In the one that's labelled 1939, you put the things that those children would be allowed to take in their suitcase. And in the one that's labelled today are the items that you would take. In the section where the 2 circles overlap is the things that would be the same in both suitcases. So what would both suitcases have that are exactly the same? So that is the last activity for today, to complete this Venn diagram for your suitcase. Once you've done that, you can upload a picture to Teams and I'll have a look at it there. Thanks for listening, guys. Have fun.